Shalom. Welcome to 15 Minutes with the Captains. I'm Captain Kim UL, and we're going into today the woman separated by the issue of blood. What does that mean? So we're going to go into the law. We're going to give a couple of examples. All right. So let's begin with Leviticus chapter 15. We're going to read verses 19 through 25.
The book of Leviticus chapter 15, verse 19. And if a woman have an issue, and her issue in her flesh be blood, she shall be put apart 7 days, and whosoever toucheth her shall be unclean until the even.
So the first part is when a woman is on her menstrual cycle, okay, that means that's being put apart 7 days, all right? So when she comes on her period, she is to be put apart 7 days. Read on.
Verse 20. And everything that she lieth upon in her separation shall be unclean. Everything also that she sitteth upon shall be unclean. And whosoever toucheth her bed shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And whosoever toucheth anything that she sat upon shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And if it be on her bed, or on anything whereon she sitteth, when he toucheth it, he shall be unclean until the even.
So if it be on her bed or on anything that she sitteth, it shall be unclean until even. So that means her bed, her chair, sofa, anything that she comes in contact with. So we're going to get an example of that. Let's go to the book of Genesis, chapter 31. We're going to read verses 34 and verse 35, okay? Genesis 31, 34, and 35.
The book of Genesis, chapter 31, verse 34. Now Rachel had taken the images and put them in the camel's furniture and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. Verse 35. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before thee, for the custom of the woman is upon me. And he searched but found not the images.
So if you don't know the history, when Jacob was taking Rachel and Leah and his children and departing from the house of Laban to begin to take care of his own house, his wife, Rachel, had stolen her father's images, his idols, okay? And his father stopped them to search for him. Read verse 35 again.
Verse 35. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before thee, for the custom of woman is upon me.
The custom of women is upon me. So what is she referring to? Her menstrual cycle or her period, to make it plain. All right, from there, let's go back to Leviticus 15 and pick up where we were.
Go to 23.
Let's go.
The book of Leviticus, chapter 15, verse 23. And if it be on her bed or on anything whereon she sitteth, when he toucheth it, he shall be unclean until the even. And if any man lie with her at all, and her flowers be upon him.
Now, when it says in her flowers, that's the blood of her menstrual cycle, okay? And her flowers be upon him.
He shall be unclean 7 days.
He shall be unclean 7 days. Go ahead.
And all the bed whereon he lieth shall be unclean.
And all the bed whereon he lieth shall be unclean. From there, let's go to Leviticus chapter 18, and we're going to read verse 19.
The book of Leviticus, chapter 18, verse 19.
First of all, jump up to verse 2 and 2 through 4.
The book of Leviticus, chapter 18, verse 2. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, I am the Lord your God. After the doings of the land of Egypt.
So now, the Lord is telling us, after the doings of the land of Egypt, go ahead.
Wherein ye dwelt, shall ye not do. And after the doings of the land of Canaan, whither I bring you,
because we were getting the land of the Canaanites. So after the doing of the Egyptians, after the doings of the Canaanites,
shall ye not do.
shall ye not do. Read.
Neither shall ye walk in their ordinances. Ye shall do my judgments and keep mine ordinances, to walk therein. I am the Lord your God.
So we are to keep the law, statutes, commandments, the ordinances of our God. Okay, now let's jump down to verse 19.
Verse 19. Also thou shalt not approach unto a woman to uncover her nakedness, as long as she is put apart for her uncleanness.
So when she's on her menstrual cycle, when she's on her period, we are not to approach her to have sex with her. Okay, that's what was going on in Egypt. That's what was going on in the land of Canaan. The Lord said, those things shall we not do. Let's go to the book of Leviticus, chapter 20. And we're going to read verse 18. Let's read the judgment.
Yes. The book of Leviticus, chapter 20, verse 18. And if a man shall lie with a woman, having her sickness, and shall uncover her nakedness, he hath discovered her fountain, and she hath uncovered the fountain of her blood, and both of them shall be cut off from among their people.
Okay, so now let's go back. Read verse 24 again.
Leviticus chapter 15, verse 24. And if any man lie with her at all, and her flowers be upon him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and all the bed whereon he lieth shall be unclean.
Now, we're going to give you another example. Well, you know what? Let's read verse 25. I'll give you an example after we read 25. Let's read verse 25.
Verse 25. And if a woman have an issue of her blood many days out of the time of her separation.
So let's deal with that. If a woman have an issue of her blood many days out of the time of her separation. I want to deal with the time of her separation, because we know the period, it's the menstrual cycle, it's 7 days. Okay, that's the time of her separation, 7 days. But there's another time of separation. Let's get that in Leviticus chapter 12. We're going to read 1 through 5, and that is for childbirth. Okay, so she can be put apart for her menstrual cycle. She can also be put apart for the days of separation during childbirth. Let's read that.
The book of Leviticus chapter 12, verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a woman have conceived seed and born a man-child, then she shall be unclean 7 days, according to the days of the separation for her infirmity shall she be unclean.
So she shall be unclean 7 days, right? Read.
And in the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. And she shall then continue in the blood of her purifying 33 days.
So now you have to add an additional 33 days. That's the blood of her purifying. Go ahead.
She shall touch no hollow thing, nor come into the sanctuary.
Nor what?
Nor come into the sanctuary.
Go ahead.
Until the days of her purifying be fulfilled.
So now that's a total of 40 days. Go ahead.
Verse 5. But if she bear a maid child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her separation. And she shall continue in the blood of her purifying 66 days.
So 66 days, a score being 20. So that's 66 days plus the 2 weeks. So that's 80 days. So she should be separated 40 days for a man-child, a son, and 80 days for a maid-child or a daughter. So let's go back to chapter 15 again and verse 25.
The book of Leviticus, chapter 15, verse 25.
Yes.
And if a woman have an issue of her blood many days out of the time of her separation.
So we just dealt with the times of her separation. Okay, read on.
Or if it run beyond the time of her separation.
So now let's say she's bleeding past the 7 days. Okay, it could just be she's a natural period flow, but it goes beyond 7 days. Go ahead.
All the days of the issue of her uncleanness shall be as the days of her separation. She shall be unclean.
She shall be unclean. But now, there's another reason why a woman could bleed excessively beyond 7 days. Before we get that, let's go to 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11 through 15. Let's deal with the period first. Let's deal with why the woman gets a menstrual cycle and a period in the first place, and she has to be separated and put apart for 7 days. We're going to read 1 Timothy chapter 2, 11 through 15.
The book of 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11. Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection. But if I suffer, But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence.
But to what?
But to be in silence.
But to be in silence. Go ahead.
For Adam was first formed, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression.
It says, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Now, let's see, what was Paul quoting? Let's get the history behind that in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 16.
The book of Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee.
So it says, unto the woman, because this was the judgment. This was the judgment. She transgressed, okay? It says, unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. What is that going into? Menstrual cycles, labor pains, okay? In thy sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband. That's the part about usurping authority. You shall not usurp authority, sisters, over the man. And he shall rule over thee. So your desire should be to your husband. Go back to 1 Timothy, and let's read 2 and 15.
The book of 1 Timothy, chapter 2, verse 15. Notwithstanding, she shall be saved in childbearing, if they continue in faith and charity and holiness with sobriety.
Okay, so that saved in childbearing is if she remembers the judgment that was placed upon her because of our foremother Eve. All right, so from there, now let's go to Deuteronomy 28. We're going to read verse 59 through 61, because there could be another reason that a woman bleeds outside of those 7 days that were prescribed for her separation. We've already dealt with the 7-day separation for a period. We've dealt with childbirth, but let's say she's still bleeding outside of that. So it could be natural, but then there could be diseases. And one disease that we know of that causes this is called endometriosis. All right. So let's read that in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 59 through 61.
The book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 59. Then the Lord will make thy plagues wonderful, and the plagues of thy seed, even great plagues, and of long continuance, and sore sickness, and of long continuance. Moreover, he will bring upon thee all the diseases of Egypt, which thou wast afraid of, and they shall cleave unto thee. Also, every sickness and every plague.
And every what?
And every plague, which is not written in the book of this law, them will the Lord bring upon thee until thou be destroyed.
So every sickness and every plague which is not written in the book of this law. So we don't read about endometriosis, okay? But we're going to read a sister that had some sort of plague that was affecting her. Was it endometriosis? We don't know for certain. The Bible doesn't use that term, but we know today that we have many of our sisters suffering a very similar plague. All right. So let's get that in Mark chapter 5, and we're going to read verses 25 through 34.
The book of Mark chapter 5, verse 25. And a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse.
It says a woman that had an issue of blood 12 years. So she was battling with that bleeding out of the time of her separation for 12 years. Go ahead.
And had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse.
Read.
When she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind, and touched his garment. For she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, as she felt in her body that she was healed, and of that plague.
That she was healed of that plague. So it says that running that issue of blood for 12 years was a plague. Remember what we read in the curses, that there would be plagues and long sicknesses and continued sicknesses, right? That would be upon us. That would be a curse upon the children of Israel. Read.
And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press, and said, who touched my clothes? And his disciples said unto him, thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, who touched me?
Read.
And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him.
She, what's the term? She was performed obeisance. Okay. She humbled herself before Christ. Read.
And told him all the truth. And he said unto her, daughter, thy faith had made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague.
You see that? Go in peace and be whole of thy plague. Go ahead. That's it, right? That's it. So, this is what we've gone over is the law of separation, the woman that is bleeding outside the time of her separation. OK, so remember, and especially you sisters out there, that you have your menstrual. You also put apart for your for the time of birth. OK, so now what we're going to show you, we're going to read symptoms of endometriosis, because the sister, she was healed from that plague. We read that plague in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 59 through 61. So, Isaiah, read about endometriosis.
Yes, sir. Symptoms. The primary symptom of endometriosis is pelvic pain, often associated with menstrual periods. Although many experience cramping during their menstrual periods, those with endometriosis typically describe menstrual pain that's far worse than usual. Pain also may increase over time. Common signs and symptoms of endometriosis include excessive bleeding.
Include what?
Excessive bleeding.
Excessive bleeding. Go ahead.
You may experience occasional heavy menstrual periods or bleeding between periods.
Bleeding between periods. So that's bleeding outside the time of your separation. Okay. So we pray you got something out of this. This has been 15 minutes with the captains going into women bleeding outside the time of her separation. Make sure you tune in to more 15 minutes with the captains and get your daily dose. And with that, we say shalom.
What is the nation?
Nation is men leading by example. Nation is family. Exploitation.